on a YouTube channel, whatever. I see guys. I see John, Joe, I see Matthew, and and the guys from our team. So we can actually start with a pull request that we currently have in progress. We can discuss if there is some unknown things and if it has any questions, and then go to the backlog. One more thing that I would like to announce today. So we have more tight collaboration with Community Engineering. And the idea is actually to automate those two projects, two boards that we have on Cloud Docker project, and also the same will happen to the ECU tools. So we will add integration with a community engineering application, which will move items automatically, depending on the different statuses. Like if review passed, or QA passed, or whatever. So everything will be done automatically by the specific actions on the pull request. I will provide more details later once this integration will be finished. Meanwhile, I'm working on finishing the boards columns. So for pull requests, we have 3 pull requests currently. One pull request is yes. Yeah, if you have questions, you can stop me and ask if you have anything. So we have a big item, like important one, set varnish as default cache. It is being developed by Nadia, who is from our team. And we have also a pull request from the Zilker tech guys regarding the adding xdebug proxy path to the varnish. It is looking good. The only thing that I requested is because we support 2 varnish versions, I would ask you to update it and to add the same snippet to the VCL file to the varnish 4.0.
Yep, all that to the PR.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much. Next pull request is actually from me. This is pretty huge pull request. I do not expect it to go into the 1.0.0 release because it's actually changes, touches a lot of code. Just few words here, essentially that we want to add the container health checks, and in this pull request I added only one health check for proof of concept. I added the health check for Elasticsearch if it's a start, and until that we do not start our containers. But also I refactored a bunch of code with our compose generators, trying to make it more reliable and less fragile, because I saw a few pull requests which broke the functionality entirely, and I want to make those changes less disruptive, so we can have more consistent quality. So yeah, I said this pull request is pretty large, and if you have a wish, I will be very thankful if you can review and write comments to this pull request. Any questions before we move into the backlog? Okay, cool. So let's go again, I think, from top. And there are not so many new items, but let's review them, figure out what if you want to do anything with this, and then move to the bottom. So first item I see from Joe is the bug enabled and pre-configured in developer mode. Can you, Joe, provide more information on this pull request? Is it fixed by pull request from the Met?
No, this one is a little different. This is An issue I foresee where in order to get Xdebug working on your local environment, you need to change a cloud configuration file, magento.app.yaml to add Xdebug as a PHP extension. And this will lead to developers enabling Xdebug, using it locally, and then having to disable Xdebug every time they go through an issue or a ticket. So it would be preferable if Xdebug were always enabled in developer mode. Or if there were some way to enable Xdebug without changing files that are committed to the repository, basically.
Okay, I see. Yeah, so I can think about a few different ways. So we can add the option, or we can actually use a Docker Compose override and change the environment variable which defines the list of enabled modules, PHP extensions. Or maybe we can add this to be enabled in developer mode.
One of the nice things, developers have to do that to switch between production mode and developer mode. So like a lot of the front end developers will actually switch to production mode and then test their compiled, stuff, and they prefer it that way actually. So, this isn't the only place that happens. However, one nice thing about this is there's a really easy way to fix this, and that's that you just can run a second container, a second PHP FPM container, and then add an Nginx rule that checks for the presence of that same cookie. And if it's there, it just routes to the PHP FPM that's running the Xdebug. And if a project doesn't want Xdebug, they can turn it off. But so what we've done is we've only turned Xdebug on in a PHP FPM container, because if you turn it on in the cron or in the build or deploy container, it slows all those processes down quite a bit. Like, especially the build container, it's extraordinary. It's like a double the time for static compile deploy. So you already want to limit it. So one of the solutions, there was two solutions in this ticket, I think, that somebody brought up. And the second one was to just make a second container with FPM running Xdebug. And that's by far the best way to do it. I've done that in the past, and it's pretty easy to do. And then that way, if they have that option on, to use Xdebug, it will just generate that container, and we can assume that that's what they want for development. That can always be on.
Makes sense.
Why don't we do something like we do on Cloud Staging and Just bring up another PHP FPM with Xdebug enabled and have that one
exactly
for that stuff?
Yeah, that's what Joe actually describing. That's how we can do this. Yeah. Any more questions? It looks like pretty good issue to fix. Can we approve it, Evgeny?
Yeah. The only thing, there is a bigger topic about the whole dev mode, which we wanted to discuss. Currently, Nadia is not here today, so I'm not sure if we'll have the whole context, but we need to actually define together what dev mode is in general, because there are too many requests around that. Like, some people want varnish, some people don't. Someone wants Xdebug enabled, someone don't. So I guess we need to step back for a second and look at the dev mode in general and define what that should be in a ideal world.
What's your proposal? Like, you think about more options to configure, like enable, disable, varnish, or you think like?
I guess it's less about more options. It's more about more, I would say, holistic design of dev mode. So looking, stepping back and instead of like incrementally adding those, just trying to actually define the design of dev mode from ground up. Again, saying what is enabled, what is not, etc. Because we're now adding features to it, but it's getting complicated and confusing. So I guess ideally we would want to have some design there and then review with guys like Matt, Joe, and others to make sure it serves all the needs.
Do you want to do this on the grooming, or you think about a separate meeting for those discussion?
Well, I guess the ticket about varnish was the first one which started this conversation. So I guess in chat we discussed it. We may want to discuss it today if possible.
I think I missed those conversation. Was it in
There
the
was 100-something message thread in the Cloud
regarding the varnish?
regarding varnish, dev mode, and in general everything related to dev mode.
Okay, then we can try to discuss it actually. We have all the guys needed. Was there somebody from who is not on call today?
No, it was myself, and also it was Joe, and there were a couple others that were discussing it as well. I mean, so varnish, first of all, like developer mode for Magento, we should is really important to cover, because to do the difference between production and developer mode, one of the biggest key changes is that you have to rebuild without static content, right? And that happens on the fly. And you're setting different environment variables or a configuration file or whatever to make sure that Magento itself is running in that mode. So that switch between production and development mode at this point for cloud Docker is a little bit tenuous. It's kind of a mix. If you look at the documentation and you kind of follow that, you end up with production mode, but you can switch it to developer mode. And I think that a lot of developers end up doing that, and then leave whatever stack they're given just there. So if varnish is turned on, then they have varnish in their stack, and it by default it just is a pass through until you push the VCL in, at least ideally, and it shouldn't really matter until they turn on the Fastly cache, which is an application change, right? And then you have to push that VCL up, or I mean not Fastly, but the varnish cache has to be turned on, and then you have to push the VCL in to varnish the same way. It's just sort of done behind the scenes. So it's like a conscious decision that a developer has to make to use it. But the thing that I think is broken there is that when you turn on the Cloud Docker now and varnish is there, I'm not sure it's entirely in pass-through mode. It seems to do things that it should, as if varnish was turned on, right? Even before you turn varnish on and push the config in. So I think that the ticket we have that you were opening was the have varnish on by default, which is possible, but then you have to think through how it should behave in the different modes, whether they're in development mode, which I think still is going to require a conscious configuration change in your stack. So it's really important for us to support varnish though. So, and my biggest point in that thread was that I feel like we should be encouraging developers to leave varnish on and learn how to interact with it more so that they're getting what they want out of it. Because it's such a critical component to Magento that developing with that off, people start to put more code into their blocks and count more on the block cache and things of that nature instead of understanding that they should be, building out the AJAX responses for that private data, etc. It's like almost like a conscious demarcation line to say this cache should be on, and if you are getting stuff that's over cached, then you should change the way you're coding, right? Like we're supporting that idea. So I prefer it on, basically, personally. But that was my part in the thread, anyways.
Yeah, the problem with Varnish is actually it's not easy to disable it once you have built a stack, because it's just proxying all of the requests. So the thing that Nadia tried to do in those pull requests is actually make some kind of decision if you want to have Varnish enabled, depending on your current Docker mod. But it also has some kind of drawbacks.
I guess Matt's point was actually not remove it and enable it.
Yes.
That's one of the reasons why we stopped this pull request. So this pull request for now.
Well, this pull request does not actually disable Varnish. This pull request enables Magento to be able to work and then clean cache or whatever for Varnish, because the problem is that currently once you install Magento and you have Varnish, Magento does not really know that there is Varnish, because like there is no way for Magento to figure out if there is something that is standing on the front cache. So this pull request is actually changes the system configuration and changes the Magento way that it will know that there is Varnish enabled.
But for dev mode, I guess we discussed that Nani was supposed to remove it as whole. I'm not sure if she actually did that, but that was the concern why we actually stopped it for now.
Yeah, that was possible solution. True. Yeah, so
I guess the point Matt just raised was more about the differences between dev and production mode, that those should be around how we deploy versus what we deploy. So meaning like the stack should be the same, but for example, production mode or similar things.
I've got a comment on that. I think I'm mainly interested in developer mode, and I don't see too much of a use for production mode myself. And I would prefer that developer mode is kind of designed with an ease of use, as opposed to a resemblance to production mode. I don't want to think that we have to stay chained to production mode. I'd rather have developer mode be something that's quite intentionally different and kind of prioritizes ease of use over a similarity to the cloud environment.
yeah, that's a good point.
Well, the production mode, though, is also used, at least in our case, for our integration tests, for like regression testing, et cetera, in our Jira. Like it uses the same Docker. So although developer mode is really important to the developers, it's super important to think that this is going to be used for all the automated testing. The Magento, functional testing framework and all the other things are going to use these same containers. So it's super important for it to work in all the different modes and be very opinionated about it. I think it should be opinionated. I don't think that Varnish, all that Varnish really is like a pointer out of the TLS container. So like to turn Varnish on or off, really all you have to do is reroute from where the TLS container, its host file tells it to look at the Varnish container. And so all I have to do is look at the Nginx container and the problem solved. It works just fine. So you can already short circuit the Varnish container away and toggle off the Varnish container if you want. And that would be pretty easy to accommodate. Like if somebody didn't want Varnish, like fine. And I'm sure that's how it even works if you have Varnish off. But the real thing is that developer mode, it even outside of Magento Cloud, right, is a difference not just in the application configuration, but also the system underneath it, right? Like typically the settings are just different. Like we have Xdebug on, we have all these other things, etc. So I think that when you're doing Magento Cloud build or whatever, or Cloud build, like on that's where that opinion is forged, right? You're building that particular instance that way, and having a -- production or -- developer means that particular build will have that configuration. And switching back and forth between developer and production would mean that you'd have to redo that command.
And you think that the varnish presence should be always forced, or you think about like making this configurable? If you want production with varnish or without varnish, the same with development mode. Do you see the uses?
I think it's like any other service. The only difference is that we use it as a proxy. So like you can build without Redis if you want, sure. Like, you know what I mean? Like I wouldn't advise it. There's very few services that you guys, Elasticsearch, you can turn on and off, RabbitMQ, and really varnish should just be treated the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but this will definitely need to rebuild your stack, because we will change configuration of the container sequences. Currently we have a TLS, which is points to varnish, or I don't really remember the correct sequence, but it will definitely need to rebuild all of the stack. Yeah, if that's fine, if you see this usable use case for you, then we can definitely do this way. And I also like this actually the way to configure the varnish itself. But the only difference is, I think, the difference between Rabbit and the varnish will be that actually, if you do not have Redis or Rabbit in the Magento YAML, neither than relationships, then we do not install them. But I think with varnish it will be different case, because there is no way to specify if we want to have varnish via configuration files. And then by default, I think we will have to install varnish. So we will have to add option which will do not install varnish. Like it's opposite way of configuration. So it can be some kind of frustrating for somebody. You see my point?
Yeah, and like I said earlier, I really think we should be encouraging developers to use varnish, because it helps them not build code that depends on the block cache. Like it keeps your personalized, it allows it to cache what should be cached, and then the things that shouldn't be, they have to bring in via Ajax. So like it kind of encourages a good pattern. And I'd hate to make it so that we think, like, give anybody the idea that they shouldn't have it on.
That the full page, the Magento core full page cache would have a similarity with that. It would encourage that, correct?
Yeah, that's somewhat true. I mean, really, they're the same thing anyways at this point. So if they have full page cache on, but I don't know if it really would. Varnish is like the VCL is a little stronger opinionated wise, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I'm not going to complain much more than that. Like, I just think it's important for people to use varnish. It's a kind of a key component to Magento 2 stack. Yes. It makes it like 10 times as fast.
Yeah, this is Scribonic. I would also agree with you, Matt, that developers should, I mean, if it's expected to be used in production environments, then I would expect developers to use it locally, just so that they have the same environment as what we have in production. Yeah, so I would definitely like to keep it. I mean, it's pretty easy to turn on and off as needed. I mean, that's what I've been doing. I never really have to turn it off, though.
Okay, so we can summarize some kind of decision here. So we will add option which disables varnish during the Docker build compose command, and then
by default. By default, we enable it.
And by default, varnish is enabled, yes. And then we'll figure out that, yes.
When you say disable it, does that mean it's just turned? Does that mean Magento is just not configured to use it, or does that mean the varnish container is not created and used?
I actually expect the varnish container not to be created and used. I don't know if varnish itself eats a lot of resources, but if we do not expect to use it, maybe we should actually be careful with resources. We had actually requests from the internal team to do something with Elasticsearch, because Elasticsearch container by default is 1 gigabyte of RAM without any index. So so that should be very careful.
Actually, it makes total sense, because like if I had like a headless Magento implementation, I wouldn't use varnish. Doesn't help at all. Nothing's going to be cached. Maybe some things could be cached if you're clever about the VCL. But either way, like I might choose not to have varnish on a project. It's just extra layer.
Yeah.
Yes. So okay. So if user does not want varnish, we give possibility to not include varnish service into the Docker Compose, and then we will change this pull request to figure out some way to check if varnish enabled, and then change Magento configuration. If no, does not change Magento configuration and use whatever default MySQL page cache. Sounds right? Or I missed something?
That sounds right.
Sounds good.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's valuable discussion. Evgeny, are you okay? Is that an answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Varnish disrupts use of Xdebug. It looks like related to the pull request, yes?
Yeah, it's the same. It's actually a reference.
Okay, I'm just changing progress.
Yeah, I'll fix that here today. It'll only take a few minutes. After we get off this call, I'll deal with it.
Cool. One important addition that I actually forgot to make before we started agreement. So we also making some movements to the maintainers. So we want to have some community maintainers for the pull request project. We are currently finalizing some permissions for this, but I think till the end of this week I will give you update, and we will choose few maintainers for the Cloud Docker project, so at least you can manage labels and the status of pull request, because I know that does not have any permissions is kind of frustrating. So I will provide more details regarding the community maintainers later this week. Thank you for your submissions. Okay, cool. Next one called compile less.
Hey, I had a question on the previous pull request. Do we regard, or does Magento regard PHP Storm as kind of a recommended IDE to use in general? Or I'm just wondering why the preference in both documentation and in this pull request for PHP Storm.
I think it actually came from more community, because from community perspective, PHP Storm is still the most widely used IDE. I think that maybe that was the root cause why we prefer PHP Storm. But I can ask them and check what's their community preference, but I'm mostly sure this should be mostly PHP Storm.
I guess PHP Storm actually has some Magento specific extension.
Yeah, it has Magento specific extension, and actually Magento core itself too complicated without proper IDE. So, but no, I have maybe some, yeah.
You can still use Sublime with this, like so like we have a mix of Mac and PC users, and so like some may be on Sublime, and they can set their Xdebug session thing to PHP Storm in there. It's it's a little confusing, but that's pretty common actually. it probably would be better for this pull request and in general, I guess, if we supported this cookie anonymously, like we didn't care about the data in it, because to be fair, if they have the xdebug cookie, it doesn't really matter what the value is, just pass it anyways. So I might change the that if statement there so that it looks at just whether the cookie exists and not what's in the cookie.
Yeah, I mean, I think that gives a broader range of support. And I guess I was just kind of wondering if Magento does have an official relationship with PHP Storm, or just wondering what the politics are there.
No,
it is the most used IDE. I realize that.
No, I guess there is no politics behind that. So if we all think that it should support more than PHP Storm, and everyone agrees with that, it would be good to just look at the cookie itself, maybe, if there are no other drawbacks behind that, because I'm not sure.
No, for all we know, maybe they're using some sort of other way to look at this, some integration script or whatever PHP unit can actually pull PHP requests. So who knows? It's better to probably just change that to be anonymous and not care what the content says. And that change is super easy. So I'll do that when I update the pull request.
Okay, I will just less.
Can you put it in the pull request itself better?
Yeah. Sure. Where is pull request? Cool. Okay. Any more questions on this issue? Can we move forward? Okay. If you have any question, you can always drop some comment to the issue. Okay, next one is compile last using Grunt.
Very similar request was about RJS and actually fun and all the fun stuff. So neither of those work.
So you guys, Andrei,
I tried to instruction which you have in the docs for cloud, but on Docker it doesn't work.
Okay, I think it will be fair to say Spark.
It looks like we have NPM already available with PHP image, so build container should have access to NPM, but not sure if it has access actually to yarn or something else what is needed there.
Yeah, is compiling less widely used practice for the cloud users? Do you have such kind of requests guiding specific less compilation?
I would say about 20% of my projects use a non-standard theme that needs its own custom compilation.
I've also seen it kind of frequently, not so much at Zilker, but previously. I would say that this only really needs to be in the deploy and the build container, though. And it doesn't hurt to have Grunt or other things like that compiled into those containers. And yarn and, like all the various things that go with Grunt. I know that on some of our projects, we had like a separate container that did some of this previously.
Yeah, I think technically it should be only for CLI containers, so we need to check if CLI container supports those stacks, Grunt, and the gulp, whatever. And maybe we need to sync with our dev docs and see what are their suggestions and check if everything works.
In our dev docs, we have the use case of setting it up on cloud, and that works because we actually got a request from customer like 1.5 years ago, and we actually at that point didn't support it officially. So we went through all the steps to make it work, and after that documented the flow. So whatever is in that docs right now actually works on cloud. I mean on target cloud itself. But I guess some component is still missing on Docker. So we've added like npm into PHP and same stuff like as we have on cloud, but we definitely miss something.
Okay, good. So, okay, we have internal ticket, we have a ticket. So I'm over to accept. It looks like valid use case, and we should fix it. Okay.
Can't this be done too the same way we're doing like the PHP container with various PHP extensions, allowing it to be configurable? Like, because the thing is this is really dependent on the choices they made when they developed their theme and so on. So it gets like into almost like configuration too. They need configuration changes, not just like having the things available.
Yeah, it's actually supposed to work like that. The only thing I guess which doesn't work right now is that for this to work in cloud, we add something into runtime section, runtime extensions, etc.
I think dependencies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, dependencies. So we add dependencies, and I guess Docker right now doesn't read this. So it reads extensions, but it doesn't read the dependencies essentially. So that's why, like Node.js and similar things are not launched properly.
Yeah, this is valid. Okay, so technically we need to implement those dependencies, looks like. Okay. The only my comment will be here that actually if you want to implement this, I still would like to move towards the platform agnostic implementation, so we should not really fail on those dependency resolving, and maybe provide alternative ways except the dependencies from Magento YAML, like also adding options, or maybe introducing some kind of configuration file for our cloud Docker, but dependencies and those configurations is pure Magento Cloud implementation, but I would actually expect Cloud Docker to be compatible not only with Magento Cloud, but with more platforms, and so we can have more auditory, more contributors. Yeah. Okay. Any more comments? It was next one is adding another website keeps redirect to the default one. How is that?
So it's multi-domain setup. It doesn't look like without some magic it works right now. So we don't read like Magento vars.php or similar things we use on cloud to route domains. And since you don't have Fastly essentially, which is routing your domains, you are not able to set more than one domain.
Do you think it's valuable for local development to have multi-domain setup?
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I guess how otherwise
like,
you can test.
Yeah, as soon as you get past having one store, you need this. You may have like a US store or Canada store. I mean, those are like even. It's just like this is actually a hard change. I looked at this one.
Yeah, really confusing. It'll require a lot of change, but it is important. Your merchants are coming to Magento. One big reason is it's multi-store support, and obviously we need to develop different themes for different stores. There's often a different code base running for different stores, so we need to be able to test and develop those code bases.
So technically, Magento vars is pretty simple file, so we can possibly try to do something with this file and try to include in our PHP configuration.
Isn't it just appended to PHP configuration?
The thing that actually we change our PHP configuration currently only via variable, so maybe we need to figure out the way how we can actually use those file for our containers. Maybe we can actually bind it as some kind of volume, or so. Yeah, it definitely needs some kind of spike and investigation on this because.
This will affect the routing too, right? Because you'll probably need to change something in
Yeah.
TLS container, and maybe, I don't know about varnish, but all the chain essentially will be affected.
The routing is the most difficult part because right now most of the containers only support one URL or one domain name. Trying to figure out how to support more than one was beyond my ability anyway.
So if you look at how it's done in cloud, though, right? We have a couple places in cloud where that you have to add the results to that. There's already the Magento vars.php, which is parsed to help support the multi-store, and then a little configuration, you're good to go. So like, it's not that hard to just reuse that. It works really good. The parity to the Magento app.yaml and things in the cloud configuration does not make it entirely dependent on cloud either. It's just like the way that Magento does it. It does it that way in cloud, and it does it that way in Docker. So I think that supporting Magento app.yaml and those other like Magento vars and the other things that make cloud work would enable this pretty easily.
My fear is that in some point it will actually require us to generate this custom Nginx configuration, because actually on the Magento Cloud it takes all of our configurations and generate big Nginx configuration file, if you ever had experience with those. And that's how it doesn't. Yeah.
That's happening
You
right
definitely
now.
need. Yeah, it's already happening.
Because in your Docker compose.yaml, you can specify the URL you'd like to use, and it adds that somehow to configuration. But it doesn't support more than one, and that's what we need. We need more than one URL to be supported.
Yeah, so this will be a very non-trivial task.
I think it'll be difficult.
And even supporting rows, I think rows should not be part of this task, because rows itself very problematic task. So we can do with some smaller, maybe we can just start with subdomain support, because subdomain actually will solve partially will solve this problem. And I think adding subdomain support is easier from the Docker container perspective than listening different domains. So we can start with subdomains and then evolve and add more possibilities. Like the example that Gary posted.
That makes sense. But then somebody who came along and would want to have multiple domains wouldn't be able to test it there, but who cares?
Well, I think it's one of those confusing gotchas, though, that we should think about. Why do you support subdomains but not multiple domains?
So you feel like we should start right away with domains?
Well, yes, subdomains will be kind of, part of the problem, I guess. So some people do virtual domains, some people do subdomains, some people do folders actually. So that's the confusing part.
Most of where the multi-domain is done on the cloud is in the Magento vars.php. It's not done in the routes or anywhere else. And that file is just parsed before, or right before the index.php or something. in pub index, so that those are in the PHP.
Doesn't it actually supply the store code to index PHP and that's it?
It
So
does, yeah. It totally and it like supports multiple domains or whatever else you want. It seems like that, like, and just make it like not care, pass everything. And if it matches the host and is set up here, then so be it. And keep your default, but pass any other host and let Magento Vars do its magic.
Yeah, I also think that it is the best approach actually to use Magento Vars and then try to just pass the different variables into the Magento.
Yeah, I think it will be easier than trying to hack Nginx on the fly. Because with the routes, web applications, all that fun stuff is pretty complicated.
Yeah, this kind of gets rid of the problem entirely, and I think that that's why Cloud did it that way too. It's actually a very elegant solution to the problem, I think.
Yeah, because you essentially do not touch any routing at all, so you just pass whatever store calls and get what you need, and let the application handle it, which makes sense.
It doesn't cover all of the solutions. I think Nadia have some tickets where Magento Vars doesn't work, but I don't have too much information about those. But for most cases, it should be pretty.
So there it doesn't work out of the box, but with some additional customization it works. So we were trying in the ticket to make all the use cases work out of the box automatically, so the C tools can resolve everything on the fly. But that's what we were not able to do. On the other hand, I guess she said that there are no use cases which cannot be supported with customizations of Magento Vars.
Cool. Yeah, looks positive. Anything else for this case, for this issue?
Just drop the improvement label, I guess, because it's.
I don't know what will be the code.
Yeah, you put feature request, it's fine.
Okay, cool. Where we are. Okay, so looks like we finished with all the new issues. Next one will be platform agnostic Docker, which is in progress. Do you might have any issue, any updates on those? Maybe you need help from our team or whatever. Do you have Matt on call?
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
here.
I'm still here. The other Matt.
I don't know which Matt you were looking for. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I know we're working on this one. I don't remember. Scroll down to the bottom. What's the last comment here? Assigned to me. Oh, yeah. Okay. I need to look at. We have an internal ticket for this. I need to look at that ticket and see where we're at. But we are working on this one.
Cool. Yeah, if any help needed, please don't hesitate to ask. We have developer resources which can help with this ticket, and don't hesitate to ask our help.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, next one. Add separate mutagen session for vendor directory. I don't remember why we didn't actually proceed here. Maybe we decided that it is not suitable.
I guess we didn't actually review it.
Didn't review it?
Mm-hmm.
Possibly. Okay, so I think this ticket from me. So idea is actually to add the separate mutagen session for vendor and do not have all of the files to be synced via the one session. So not to make it more stable, and I think it's better from mutagen docs, or how they say, to use it.
Would that really make life more simple though? Because now you have multiple mutagen sessions that you're having to keep track of. And we still have the issue where, I mean, I've seen mutagen get stuck on other files that aren't in vendor. And then
Actually,
you still have the issue where, yeah.
This is genius, and how I solved the problem with using mutagen remotely was by segmenting it into each folder in Magento. Because the less files each mutagen session has, but a requirement of this is that you must tag the segments so that you can actually delete the segments. You can't just count on it automatically naming them and then letting them go stale. Like you have to name it like vendor and base or whatever. And you start to get into a situation where you need to ignore vendor in the base or, /app mutagen session, but and then you have to have a separate segment. You know what I mean? So like some directories, even some subdirectories, you want to ignore. So it gets very complex architecturally pretty quickly. And I ended up with a very complex mutagen file. Like it literally was a shell script that was a bunch of mutagen sessions. So be careful with this one. You're adding a lot of complexity. It also solves the problem, but
yeah, that was my concern. Is if it's done right, it sounds like it'll help, but if it's not done correctly, it may make the whole thing more difficult for someone to work with.
I think I know why we didn't do anything with this, because we have mutagen creates multiple stale session ticket, and we decided to actually do this first, but I didn't add the comment. So yeah, so we decided to make some way to clean those stale sessions and then back to those tickets. So yeah, we can actually ask update on those, and then I will just add comment that is blocked by this ticket, and then once we're done this, and then we can back to the vendor and mutagen.
The other problem I noticed with it was that people with slower, desktops or whatever, or laptops, having more mutagen sessions brought their laptops to a crawl. And I didn't see that on the server side, but because mutagen is very resource intensive, it's basically a Go script looping through a giant list of files and checking if it's changed, and then comparing it against the other side, has alpha, beta, the beta's on the remote or whatever, and it gets the same list and checks that, but it's super intense. And having more of those can be a serious detriment to performance for people.
Okay, so
then you made them multi-threaded and they've only got 4 threads or whatever, right? So
for now I will just drop the comments. So let's implement those good way to manage the multiple sessions, and then you'll figure out if you want to add more sessions. Looks like a right solution here. Everybody agree?
definitely.
Yeah, if you want to test on an old Mac, we can use mine because it's the oldest Mac in the world.
Well,
I have a 2012 Mac that still rocks it, man. I love it.
I guess we tested it on Cloud Lab and MLAU, and it was very slow because there was a Mac without SSD, so it was right in.
So what was using Docker Sync?
Mutagen. It was syncing for 25 minutes for vanilla deploy.
Mutagen takes less time.
It's because you have the Mac of 2018 or something. Those which were there were kind of 2014 or something like that.
It's definitely an issue, and it gets really bad if you do this thing where you split vendor and you split off app so that it's faster than the rest of it because that's all you make changes in, and it's because it will then be checking multiple files at the same time instead of just waiting in line. And it's actually the file system more than the CPU. So people who develop, the faster hard drives actually make a big difference
Yeah,
with Magento. So
that's what we experienced during the lab itself.
So from your perspective, like comparing Docker Sync and Mutagen, should we still prefer Docker Sync or Mutagen, or there are different use cases for those?
I was
Because
just about to ask if there was any thought of making mutagen the default. I think that's worth thinking about.
We few times I think we discussed internally, but like I still don't have like to be honest, I'm not still sure that Mutagen solve all of the problem. And like I locally use Mutagen, but like once I actually close my laptop and then go home, whatever, then been back in the morning, and then I open back the project, and actually my Mutagen stale, and like my project doesn't work. I don't know if you experience the same problem. I didn't have this problem with Docker Sync. I have this with Mutagen, so like it has some drawbacks maybe, and I still cannot say that Mutagen.
Yeah. That's true. I think Mutagen is less stable. It's faster, but it's less stable.
I have a problem with Docker Sync where it won't. If I initially set it up, it's working, and then at some point it breaks down and I can't get it working again. I'm not a pro at that kind of stuff, but I've had the same trouble with Docker Sync, that it breaks down and I can't get it started back up again.
Yeah, and I don't think that there is any actually other alternative. We can try and go with Mark Schust's behavior when he copies files back and forth, and that's like making it fast. But I'm not sure about the really user experience, because like running like those commands to transfer files can be not really like easy for everybody. Like I just want to hear your opinion. If you want to go on and add another way, like if you're not familiar with Mark Schust's project, I can just open and show it to you. It's a pretty popular one, and I think it just use different commands, which sorry, I don't really remember the base. Compose. So he has a bunch of commands, and actually few of them actually to transfer files. Let me go there. Fix pair, fix elements. Yeah, I will actually come back to this after the meeting, but I remember that actually you have to manually move the files, so that's how it fast. Docker config set install this. Okay, so here is copy from container and copy to container. So he suggests manually to using Docker CP to copy files back and forth to the Docker and back, and that's why it's fast, because you don't have any synchronization at all. But my gut feeling that it can be not very good from user perspective.
No, that's
but
too manual.
Yeah, but it's very popular, and maybe we actually missing this possibility, and that's where we have to go back and maybe look at this way. So I think actually one of our next grooming we can rotate and then check if we want to add some more synchronization methods, because I see problems with Mutagen, I see problems with Docker Sync, and I do not honestly have a good solution in mind to those problems. So
I have a different solution that we use at Zilker. So basically, people who are using Docker on Mac and PC count on Docker Desktop to install Docker for them and run the Docker commands. And that's actually the problem. That's why we're using Docker Sync and Mutagen. That's the reason they exist, is to get them in and out of that VM, not container, because it's a separate VM that's running Docker. So all the Docker Desktop does is install VirtualBox usually, and it will just spin up a VM for you, which is controlled via the Docker daemon in your host OS, right? So that's how Docker works. I don't like that. I think that's the problem. So I got rid of it, and I made us a VM, and we install Docker the way it's needed, which is really minimal. Takes like, we have an Ansible script that's doing it for us. But I mean, what you need in that VM is very, very minimal and not that opinionated, and to make it work. And then we run the containers there. We allow, we put Samba on that, which allows the Mac or the PC user to connect to the VM like it's a native drive, and they don't know the difference. Their PHP Storm works as usual. And we, the one thing so far that I found that's a little bit slower is indexing for PHP Storm. The files, when it first does its indexing, that process is slower than Samba than if it is on the host OS. But it's not that big of a deal as far as I've seen. So that literally makes it so that you don't need Mutagen or Docker Sync or any of the other things. And that same container, that same Docker Compose that we're using works in our CI/CD stack and everywhere else. So that, I know it's not a solution you can use, not easily anyways, because it's not like, just plug it into Docker and it works. But I promise you that it solves the problem. Like, it's so much faster. Literally on my fairly brand new Asus laptop, it's faster than staging servers are. My Docker containers.
Cloud staging servers.
Yeah, the cloud staging servers. Like, my time to first byte is faster on the same app.
Yeah, let's discuss this deeper next Grooming. I think we are out of time, but this may be a good solution. I think I will create a ticket, some kind of investigation ticket, and maybe ask somebody from our internal team or from you guys to drop a few ideas, and then we can research them. Yeah, because I still want to make this more suitable, and the goal is actually to even more make it work with core Magento, but it requires very good developer mode experience, and that's where we still lack it. So yeah.
A quick question, just I think a yes or a no question. As part of the operating system agnostic effort, are we switching to kind of a default mode for Docker that would not use a sync at all for the people that are using Linux and don't need it in the first place?
Yeah, I would hope so. And then you can tack on the support for Mutagen on top of that if you need it.
Yeah, that's kind of my angle as well, but we can leave it for next time.
Yeah, this looks good. If somebody can drop a ticket, we will definitely do this, because currently we have use native for developer mode, so we can actually change it to use native as default in developer mode, and then people will figure out what mode is better for them. It looks like a good idea, yeah.
Don't we have a ticket for that?
No, we don't have a ticket. Yeah.
At least I've seen something similar.
No,
I thought we had a ticket that was for kind of a operating system agnostic approach or something like that.
Yeah, it's for agnostic.
So I looked at our internal ticket on that. Matt and I will go through. There's some code for us to review, and we'll do that, and we'll put feedback on the ticket for you as soon as possible.
Cool. Okay, so don't want to take more time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Good. I will pause this. Yeah. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Good holiday.
Have a good day. Bye.